Dear all, I am well aware of how social discrimination becomes entrenched and is transmitted from one generation to the next and undermines development and justice. But it was not until recently that I really began to learn in more detail about homophobia and transphobia and how these attitudes corrode human rights of sexual minorities. In August last year, I had the honor of taking part of the International AIDS Conference in Mexico City. I saw and heard firsthand people's stories that have suffered homophobia, transphobia, and vulnerability to HIV. But I also learned of tremendous resilience, resistance, and positive social change in response to systematic discrimination. I also witnessed the commitment of ministers of health and education to stop discrimination and give access to sexual minorities. I am speaking to you today to mark May 17th, the International Day Against Homophobia, declared by these civil society organizations. And it's in this day, in May 17th, because 18 years ago, the World Health Organization decided to remove homosexuality from its list of mental disorders. In that sense, I have three main messages that I wish to share. First, that despite international progress in public health and human rights discourses, homophobia remains a far too common reality across Latin America and the Caribbean, as in many other parts of the world. Second, that homophobia and criminalization of consensual adult sexual behavior are barriers to an effective response to HIV, not only among sexual and gender identity minorities, but in all of society. And third, that homophobia is not inevitable, and that social movements and states can and must address homophobia directly and in a broader coalition with the women's movement and other human rights actors. Homophobia comes from fear, and it causes fear. It damages human relations, fractures families and communities, and inflicts pain and suffering. It is undoubtedly an obstacle to the fulfillment of fundamental freedoms and rights. Denial, fear, stigma, discrimination, and violence, including physical violence, are a daily reality for men who have sex with men and trans people. UNDP and UNAIDS, along with other UN agencies, have called for countries to decriminalize consensual sex among adults, but several countries in this region still have punitive legal frameworks which impact negatively on men who have sex with men and trans people. And regardless of the legal status of the same-sex relations, all around the world, the police is supposed to protect citizens from violence and intimidation. Tragically, in many countries, police and other state actors harass and persecute these populations. In Latin America and much of the Caribbean, HIV epidemic is concentrated in men who have sex with men and trans people, groups that are already marginalized by society. In the region, HIV prevalence among these groups is 20 to 30 times higher than in the rest of the general population. In order to prevent and control the spread of the epidemic, we must protect the rights of most at-risk and marginalized populations. Heterosexual women are also increasingly affected by HIV in many countries in the region. This is not a separate epidemic or a separate phenomenon than HIV among sexual minorities. A large proportion of these heterosexual women are infected in long-term relationships with men who are themselves bisexual. So, addressing HIV transmission among sexual minorities is a crucial step in protecting women as well. And the same gender norms that underpin homophobia undermine the ability of women to protect themselves. It is imperative to develop a supportive environment where all people, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity, are treated with dignity and respect. Countries should use May 17 to examine their national legal frameworks, policies, and programs, and determine how they can be improved to protect the rights of sexual minorities. They must also examine their own investments in HIV prevention and make sure that groups working with sexual minorities are properly supported and that social drivers of the epidemic, like homophobia and gender inequality, are also addressed. Only doing so, we will be consistent with our commitment towards achieving the MDGs and protecting human rights for all. Thank you very much.